Damian Blackwood had buried 3 men this week and felt nothing. But standing on a rain-soaked street in Monterey, California, staring through a cafe window at the woman who had vanished from his life 5 years ago, his hands were shaking. Claire Whitmore was alive. She was serving coffee. She was laughing at something a customer said, and she was holding the hands of 2 small children who couldn't have been older than 5. The little boy turned toward the window. Steel blue eyes, the exact shade Damian saw every morning in the mirror. The world stopped making sound. If you've ever loved someone so completely that losing them felt like losing the ability to breathe, stay with this story until the end. Hit like so this reaches someone who needs it. And drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain had been falling since noon and showed no intention of stopping. Damian Blackwood stood on the sidewalk across from a place called the Anchor Cafe, his charcoal overcoat soaked through at the shoulders, his breath coming out in slow visible pulls that dissolved into the cold October air. He hadn't moved in 4 minutes. He knew because he'd been counting, the way he counted everything. Ammunition, exits, heartbeats during negotiations when the wrong word could end a man's life. Counting was the only thing that kept the panic from reaching his face. He had driven into Monterey 40 minutes ago on a dead end. One of his investigators, a former NSA analyst named Briggs, who had never once failed to locate a target in 11 years of working for the Blackwood organization, had flagged a property transfer in this coastal California town. The name on the deed was Sarah Calloway. The physical description buried in a DMV record from 3 years ago was close enough to make Briggs uncomfortable. Brown hair, 5'4", green eyes, a small crescent-shaped scar below the left collarbone from a bicycle accident at age 9 that Claire had described to Damian once while they were lying in the dark of his Manhattan penthouse, her voice soft and half asleep. Briggs had called it a 40% match. A maybe. Not worth Damian's personal time. Damian had gotten in his car and driven from San Francisco himself. He didn't know what he'd expected to find. After 5 years of 40% maybes that became nothing, he had trained himself not to expect anything. The hope had been the worst part early on, each lead arriving like a hand reaching through water and then dissolving before he could close his grip around it. He had learned to approach every new lead with the same cold detachment he brought to contract disputes. Clinical, measured, already half prepared for the outcome to be nothing. He was not prepared for this. Claire stood behind the counter in a pale blue apron, her brown hair pulled back in a loose knot at the base of her neck with a few strands escaping around her jaw the way they always had. She looked older. Not worse. Just worn down in the way that real life wore people down. The kind of tired that came from doing everything alone and getting up anyway. She was taking an order from a gray-haired man at the counter, nodding, scribbling something on a notepad. And then she turned toward the espresso machine and Damian saw her profile clearly for the first time in 5 years. And something in his chest moved in a way that had nothing to do with rage and everything to do with a wound that had never closed. Then the twins came through the kitchen door. They were small and quick and came in the way children always entered rooms, without considering whether the room was ready for them. The girl went directly to a corner booth and climbed up to sit with a book that looked too large for her hands. The boy stopped near the counter and said something to Claire that made her glance down and then immediately look toward the window. Her eyes found Damian. Across the rain in the glass and the 5 years of silence between them, Claire Whitmore's face went the color of old chalk. The boy looked up then, following his mother's gaze. Steel blue eyes under dark brows, a jaw that would one day be sharp and deliberate, a stillness in his expression that was not a child's stillness. It was an old stillness, inherited from somewhere. Damian's vision narrowed to a single point. He watched Claire crouch down and speak quickly to both children. The boy protested something. The girl closed her book without arguing. Claire ushered them toward the back of the cafe, one hand between each set of small shoulders, moving fast without looking like she was running. She knew he had seen her. She was running anyway. Damian crossed the street. He didn't go inside. He understood, with a precision that surprised him, that walking through that door right now would be the wrong move. He was a man who had learned that the most dangerous thing you could do in any confrontation was be the first one to break. He would wait. He was very good at waiting. He had spent 5 years waiting. He found a covered doorway 2 shops down and stood in it with his hands in his coat pockets and his eyes on the cafe's front entrance, watching the rain turn the cobblestones dark and shining under the streetlights that had just flickered on in the early dusk. The cold worked its way through the wet wool at his shoulders, but he didn't move. He breathed. He thought about nothing, the way he'd trained himself to think about nothing when the alternative was falling into something that would compromise his judgment. He thought about the boy's eyes. He failed to think about nothing. Inside the cafe, Claire was moving fast, but trying not to show it. She sent the twins to the back office with a plate of the shortbread cookies she kept behind the counter for situations that required bribing 5-year-olds into compliance, and she stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment with her back against the frame and her palms flat against the cold metal and her lungs refusing to operate at normal capacity. Damian Blackwood was standing on her street. 5 years of very careful, very expensive, very exhausting invisibility, and he was standing on her street in the rain like a fact she had been outrunning and had finally run out of road to outrun it on. She had known, on some level, that it was always going to come to this. Men like Damian did not let things go. It was not in their construction. He had resources that made conventional hiding laughable, and the only reason he hadn't found her sooner was that she had been meticulous. She had given up everything, every digital trace, every connection to her former life, had essentially stepped sideways out of her own existence and become a different person in a different state with a different name and a small cafe that she had built with money borrowed from a local credit union and repaid 18 months early. She had been so careful. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and walked back out to the counter because she had customers still nursing their drinks, and she was not going to collapse in front of her own cafe on a Tuesday evening. The gray-haired man at the counter, Mr. Hennessy, who came in every Tuesday and Thursday for a decaf Americano and always left $2 in the tip jar regardless of the total, was talking about the weather. Claire answered him in complete sentences. She didn't know what she said. She could feel the space outside the window at the edge of her peripheral vision, and she was not going to look at it again. She managed the next 45 minutes through something close to muscle memory. Wiped the counter. Refilled the tea caddy. Thanked the last 2 customers as they zipped up their jackets and headed out into the rain. Turned the sign on the door to closed. She locked the front door. She went to the back, helped the twins into their jackets, listened to her son, Lucas, explain in great detail why the shortbread had been inadequate compensation for being sent away when something clearly interesting was happening. Her daughter, Lily, said nothing, which was typical. Lily processed things quietly and then produced conclusions that were generally more accurate than anyone else's in the room. "Was that man outside someone you know?" Lily asked. Claire tied the drawstring on Lucas's hood. "Let's go out the back." "That means yes," Lucas said. "It means let's go out the back," Claire said. They went out the back. The alley behind the cafe connected to a side street that ran parallel to the main road, and Claire had parked her car there since the first week she'd owned the place because she had always liked having a secondary exit. She had told herself that was about practicality. She understood now, in the cold alley air with both children's hands in hers, that it had never been about practicality. She got the twins buckled into the back seat. She got in the front. She started the engine and sat there with her hands on the wheel and the engine running and the rain coming down on the roof in a low roar, and she did not pull out. Because she knew he had seen the car. She knew because she had felt him, and she hated herself for that, for the fact that after 5 years of building a life out of his absence, she could still feel him the way you felt a change in pressure before a storm. He was out front. He knew she had a back exit because men like Damian Blackwood always mapped every exit before they chose their position. He was waiting for her to run. She sat in the car for 3 minutes, then she unbuckled her seatbelt. "Stay here," she told the twins. "Doors locked? I'll be 2 minutes." "Mom?" Lucas started. 2 minutes, she said. She met Lily's eyes in the rearview mirror. Lily looked back at her with that unreadable expression she'd had since infancy, the one that suggested she was already several steps ahead. Claire walked back down the alley and around to the front of the cafe. Damian was standing in the doorway of the closed bookshop 2 doors down. He stepped out when he saw her. He didn't move toward her. He simply stepped out of the doorway and stood in the rain, hands in his pockets, looking at her from 15 feet away with an expression that she could not immediately categorize. She had expected anger. She had been prepared for anger. She had rehearsed responses to anger in her head approximately 10,000 times over 5 years. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man who had been running on fumes for so long that arriving at the destination hadn't produced anything as clean as relief. "Claire," he said. His voice was the same. That was the thing that hit her sideways. She had somehow convinced herself that enough time would have changed it, made it unfamiliar enough to give her some distance. It was exactly the same. Low and even, and with that particular quality of never quite reaching the surface of what he was actually feeling. "This isn't—" she started. "Don't," he said. She stopped. He walked toward her slowly, closing the 15 feet between them until he was close enough that she could see the rain on his jaw, the way it had soaked through his collar. Up close, he looked older too. The lines around his eyes were deeper. There was something in him that had been filed down to a finer edge. "How long have you been in Monterey?" he asked. "Damien, how long?" 4.5 years. Something moved across his face. "The twins," he said. "How old?" She could have lied. She had rehearsed lies too, hundreds of them, practiced the particular way she would deliver them, calm and certain, the way you had to deliver lies to a man who had spent his entire adult life learning to detect them. Standing in front of him in the rain, she couldn't find a single one. "5," she said. "They're 5. He closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When he opened them, something had shifted in them that she didn't have a name for. "Were you ever going to tell me?" It wasn't a question. It was the kind of sentence that ended with a period because the person asking it already understood that the answer didn't matter because the fact of the question was already the most devastating thing in the room. "I thought—" She stopped, tried again. "I thought what I saw was—" "What did you see?" The rain was coming harder now. Claire's hair was plastered to the side of her face, and she didn't push it away. "I came home early," she said, "from the gallery show. I wanted to tell you in person." She heard her own voice going flat the way it always went flat, when she was working very hard to stay controlled. "You were in the bedroom. Victoria was—" her hand was on your chest. She was leaning close. She was saying something I couldn't hear it clearly. Damien looked at her without expression. "I thought I heard her say your name. The way—" Claire stopped again. "The way you say someone's name when it means something." The silence between them had a texture to it. Rain on pavement, a car moving through the intersection half a block down. "She cornered me while I was changing," Damien said. His voice was completely even. "She'd been building up to it for months. I didn't know you were home. I told her to leave." He paused. "You were gone before I came out of the bedroom." Claire didn't say anything. "I spent 4 months assuming you'd needed space," Damien said. "Then I spent 4 years trying to find you." He looked at her steadily. "I had people in every major city. I put resources into it that would embarrass certain government agencies. I thought you were dead, Claire. I spent 6 months believing you were dead." She felt the cold of the rain differently now. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't." His voice didn't rise, but there was something in it that made her go still. "Don't be sorry. Be honest. Tell me everything that happened after you left and let me decide what to do with it." "And the children," she said. "The children are mine." He said it without drama, without question, the way he said everything that he had already determined to be true. "That's not something I'm asking you to confirm. I know what I saw through that window." She looked at him. "What are you going to do?" "Tonight?" He pulled his collar up slightly against the rain. "Tonight, nothing. You have 2 5-year-olds sitting in a car in an alley waiting for their mother to come back, and I'm not going to be the thing that frightens them." He looked at her for a long moment. "But Claire, I'm not leaving Monterey." He reached into his coat pocket and took out a card, plain white, just a number, and held it out to her. She took it. Their fingers didn't touch. "Tomorrow," he said, "we talk. All of it." He turned and walked down the wet sidewalk toward a dark car parked at the far end of the block. Claire stood and watched him go and felt the specific vertigo of a life that had been carefully sealed and maintained suddenly developing a crack along its entire length. She walked back to the alley. Lucas had his forehead pressed against the window glass, watching for her. When she got back in the car, he said immediately, "Who was that man?" "A person from when I used to live somewhere else," Claire said. She started the engine. "He was tall," Lucas said. Yes. He looked at the car for a long time before he left, Lily said from her side of the back seat. Her voice was quiet and factual. He was memorizing the license plate. Claire's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She pulled out of the alley and drove the 8 blocks to their house without speaking, listening to Lucas talk about whether the shortbread had really been an appropriate substitute for being part of whatever had clearly been an interesting situation. And she answered him when he paused for answers, and her voice was steady. And by the time they reached the house, she had made a decision. She was not running again. She didn't have the energy for it. And more importantly, she had watched through a cafe window as her 5-year-old son looked up at a stranger and seen something she didn't have language for move across both their faces. And she understood that she had arrived at the place where running was no longer something she could ask of either of them. She got the twins into the house, through the dinner routine, through the bath routine, through the process of getting Lucas to stop asking questions long enough to lie down, through the 2 pages of Lily's current book that Lily required read aloud before sleep. She turned off the lights. She stood in the hallway between their doors for a moment in the dark. Then she went downstairs, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the white card with the phone number on it. She thought about what Damien had looked like through the cafe window before she'd seen him, before he'd known she was looking. He had been standing absolutely still in the rain with his hands in his coat pockets, and there had been something in the set of his shoulders that she recognized. Not the man who ran criminal enterprises across 4 states. Not the man who made threats that never needed to be repeated. But the version underneath all of that, the version she had known in those rare quiet hours in the Manhattan apartment when the armor came off, and he was just a person who was very tired of being the thing that other people were afraid of. He had looked standing in the rain outside her cafe, like a man who had found something he'd given up on finding. She didn't sleep. At 6 in the morning, she was back in the cafe, running the opening routine on autopilot, grinding coffee and straightening chairs and watching the autumn light come in sideways through the front windows. At 7:30, a black car pulled up across the street. It didn't move for 20 minutes. She made an extra cup of coffee, walked to the front door, unlocked it, and held it open. Damien got out of the car. He crossed the street and came inside without saying anything, and she put the coffee in front of him at the counter and went back to her side. And they looked at each other across the 6 inches of worn wooden countertop, and somewhere in the back the espresso machine made its low pressurized sound, and the morning light came through the windows, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. "The girl," Damien said finally. "What's her name?" "Lily." "And the boy?" "Lucas." He nodded once, slowly, the way he nodded when he was absorbing information that he was going to need to organize carefully. He picked up the coffee cup. His hands were steady. She had always hated how steady his hands were. "Who knows about me?" he said. "In their lives. What they know about their father." Claire looked at the counter. "I told them their father was someone I had loved very much," she said. "That it didn't work out, that he didn't know about them." "The last part was true," Damien said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "They're going to need to know who I am," he said. "Not everything. Not yet. But they need to know I exist and that I'm going to be here." He set the coffee cup down. "I'm not asking your permission for that, Claire. I want you to understand the difference." She met his eyes. "And if I disagree with how you plan to do it, then we'll argue about it," he said simply, "like 2 people who are both trying to get this right." He paused. "I know how to threaten people. I know how to make situations move in one direction. I'm choosing not to do that here, not with you, not with this. But I need you to understand that choosing not to is not the same as being incapable of it." It was, she thought, the most honest thing she'd heard in 5 years. Before she could answer, the bell above the cafe door opened, and Ethan Carter ducked inside, shaking rain from his jacket, already smiling at Claire the way he always smiled. Easy and uncomplicated, a fisherman's smile, the kind earned from being a person who liked the people he was with and didn't have much reason to pretend otherwise. He stopped when he saw Damien. There was a moment in which the 2 men registered each other in the specific way of men who immediately understood something territorial was happening, even without the benefit of context. Ethan was broad through the shoulders, fair-haired, with the comfortable self-possession of a person who had never needed to be afraid of anything. He looked at Damien, he looked at Claire. "Hey," he said to Claire. His voice was easy, but he hadn't moved. "Ethan," Claire said, "this is—" She stopped. Damien turned on the stool and looked at Ethan Carter with an expression that was completely polite and absolutely empty of warmth. "Damien Blackwood," he said. He didn't extend his hand. "Ethan Carter." Ethan's eyes went back to Claire and asked a question she wasn't prepared to answer. "Ethan's been a good friend," Claire said. "He helped me when I first arrived here." "Is that right?" Damien said, still polite, still completely, carefully empty. "Old friend of Claire's?" Ethan asked. "Something like that," Damien said. The morning light had fully arrived by now, filling the cafe in a way that made the whole scene feel overexposed. Claire could see all three of them with uncomfortable clarity. Ethan reading the room and not liking what he was reading. Damien watching Ethan with the calm attention of a man who was filing away every detail for later use, and herself standing behind the counter in her apron as the thing at the center of a situation she had believed she had successfully outrun. "I should get started," she said to no one in particular. "Ethan, the usual?" "Sure," Ethan said, but he didn't go to his usual table. He stayed near the door. Damien turned back to the counter and picked up his coffee. He didn't look at Ethan again. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered and received, and Damien Blackwood had learned long ago that messages only needed to be sent once. Over the next 2 hours, the cafe filled and emptied in its normal Tuesday rhythm. Damien sat at the counter and drank 2 cups of coffee and did not use his phone and did not speak unless spoken to. He watched the room with the particular quality of attention that most people in the cafe likely read as a man resting after a drive, and that Claire read correctly as a man who was cataloging every exit, every sightline, every person who entered and made note of the children playing in the corner booth during the half hour between school drop-off and whenever the after-school crowd would arrive. At some point, Lucas came back. Claire had forgotten. There was no school on Tuesdays, something about a rotating schedule. And Lucas and Lily came in through the back at 10, Lily with a book and Lucas with a rubber band ball he'd been constructing for 2 weeks. Lucas climbed up on the counter stool 2 seats down from Damien and began working on the rubber band ball with the focused attention of a child who had decided this was the most important project in the world. Damien watched him for a moment. Then, without looking at Claire, he asked Lucas, "What are you building?" Lucas looked up. He looked at Damien with the direct, unfiltered assessment that 5-year-olds performed on strangers, a quick, comprehensive scan that adults spent a lifetime learning to disguise. "Rubber band ball," he said. "It's going to be huge." "How big?" "Bigger than my head," Lucas said confidently. "Maybe bigger than your head. You have a big head." Damien said, "I've been told." Lucas went back to the rubber band ball. Lily, from the booth, looked up from her book and watched Damien for a full 10 seconds with those green eyes that Claire had. Green, her green, but the jaw and the brow all from somewhere else entirely, and then went back to reading. Claire stood at the espresso machine and told herself to breathe. There were things that needed to be said, arrangements that needed to be made, conversations that needed to happen, 5 years of accumulated consequence that was going to have to be sorted through with the two of them on opposite sides of it. She understood all of that. She understood that the calm of this morning was provisional, a surface tension that would eventually break. She also understood something else. Watching Damien watch her son work on his rubber band ball with the particular stillness of a man who was experiencing something for which he had no trained response. He was going to stay. It wasn't a threat, and it wasn't a question. It was the most inevitable thing that had happened in 5 years of things being forced to be certain and controlled. Damien Blackwood had found his way into a small cafe in Monterey in the October rain, and he had seen his children for the first time. And he was going to stay. And everything that Claire had built in his absence was going to have to either hold up against that, or it wasn't going to hold up at all. At 11, a man came in who didn't order anything. He was medium height, unremarkable in every deliberate way. The kind of unremarkable that was its own red flag to anyone trained to notice it. He sat at a table near the window, looked at his phone, looked at the room, looked at Damien, looked back at his phone. Damien's posture didn't change. Nothing about him changed. But when Lucas slid off the counter stool 20 minutes later to go back to the booth where Lily was, Damien leaned slightly toward Claire, not looking at her. His voice dropped below the ambient noise of the cafe. "The man at the window table," he said. "How long has he been coming in?" Claire didn't look. "First time." "Is your back door accessible from the alley, or does the alley connect to the main road?" Something cold moved through her. "Both." Don't close early. Don't change your routine. He set a 20 on the counter for the coffee. Everything is fine. I need you to trust that for the next hour, everything is fine. She looked at him then. He was already looking at his phone, his expression completely neutral. Damien, she said quietly. What is this? Probably nothing, he said. Precaution. He looked up and met her eyes for a moment. I didn't come here alone, he said. There are two of my people on the street. Nothing is going to happen to you or your children. She noticed the your. He had said your children, not my children, and she understood it was deliberate, that he was managing his language the way he managed everything, with extreme precision, giving her the version that would land most cleanly given where they were right now. She looked at the man at the window table. He was typing something on his phone. She looked back at Damien. How dangerous is it, she said, that you're here, for them, for Lucas and Lily? Damien held her gaze for a full 3 seconds before he answered. I'm going to make sure, he said, that the honest answer to that question becomes, not at all. That's what I'm working on. He slid off the counter stool, picked up his coat, and walked toward the door. He passed within 6 feet of the man at the window table without looking at him. He opened the door and left, and Claire watched through the front windows as he walked down the wet sidewalk. She watched the man at the window table. The man's phone buzzed. He read whatever the message was. He left 3 minutes later without ordering, leaving nothing on the table, not looking at Claire as he went. The cafe filled back up with its normal Tuesday rhythm. Lucas came back to the counter to report that the rubber band ball now had a circumference of nearly 8 inches and was structurally sound. Claire told him that was excellent progress. She stood at her espresso machine in her pale blue apron, and her heart was going at about twice its standard rate, and somewhere across the small coastal town, Damien Blackwood was making phone calls that she would never be allowed to know the content of. And there was a man in a dark car whose name she didn't know, watching the street outside her cafe with the particular patience of a professional, and she was making coffee for a Tuesday crowd who didn't know any of this was happening. She had known, the moment she'd looked up through the rain-streaked glass and seen him standing there, that the life she had spent 5 years constructing was not going to survive the week unchanged. What she hadn't been prepared for, what she was beginning to feel in a way that was difficult and unwelcome and entirely inconvenient, was the specific relief of no longer having to hold it together completely alone. The man at the window table had not come back, but his presence lingered in the room the way the presence of things you don't quite understand lingered, as a low, unresolved note, a question without an answer, a first indication that the past she'd thought she'd escaped had not been waiting idly. It had been preparing, and it had just let itself be known. The man at the window table had a name. It took Damien's people 4 hours to find it, which was 4 hours longer than Damien preferred. But the man had been careful. Burner phone, rented car paid in cash through a third party, no digital footprint worth mentioning. The name, when it came through on Damien's encrypted line at 2 in the afternoon, was Marco Reyes. Mid-level operator connected to the Moretti organization out of Chicago, not a shooter, a watcher. The kind of man you sent when you wanted to know where someone was before you decided what to do about it. Damien sat in the front room of the cliffside estate he had purchased that morning. A transaction completed by phone in under 40 minutes. Because when you had Damien Blackwood's financial infrastructure, real estate moved at the speed of a decision, and looked at the name on his phone screen and felt the specific quality of anger that he had learned over 20 years to keep completely below the surface. Someone already knew he was here. That meant someone had been watching before he arrived. That meant the lead Briggs had flagged wasn't a coincidence. Someone had wanted him to find Monterey. Someone had laid a trail and waited for him to follow it. He called Briggs. The DMV record, he said when Briggs picked up. The one that flagged the physical match. How did it surface? A pause. Routine sweep. The algorithm pulled it based on the parameters you set years ago. Who else has access to those parameters? A longer pause. It's a closed system, Damien. Internal only. That's not what I asked. The silence on the other end had a different quality now. I'll look into it, Briggs said. You'll look into it in the next 2 hours, Damien said, and ended the call. He stood at the window of the estate and looked out at the ocean, which was gray and restless under the afternoon clouds. And he thought about Marco Reyes sitting in a cafe with a coffee he hadn't ordered, looking at his phone, looking at Damien, looking at two 5-year-old children playing in a corner booth. He thought about Lucas working on his rubber band ball with total concentration. He thought about Lily looking up from her book with those green eyes that held something ancient and self-possessed in them. He went back to his phone and made 3 more calls. Claire didn't hear from him until 7 that evening. She was cleaning the cafe after close, both twins in the back office with tablets and the specific exhausted compliance of children who had been fed and were running out of argument, when her phone buzzed on the counter. She looked at it for a moment before she answered. "There's something you need to know," Damien said. No preamble, no asking if it was a good time. "All right," she said. "The man from this morning. He's connected to a family out of Chicago, the Morettis." A pause. "They're people I have history with. Rival organization, long-standing." Claire sat down on the stool behind the counter. The cleaning rag was still in her hand. "How serious?" "Serious enough that I want you and the children somewhere other than your house tonight." The cold that moved through her was different from last night's cold. Last night's cold had been about the past. This was about something that was happening right now, in the present tense, in the town she had chosen because it was quiet and coastal, and as far from anything like this as she had been able to get. "Damien, I know," he said. "I know what you're going to say. You brought this here." The silence lasted 3 seconds. "Yes," he said. She had expected him to argue. The simplicity of it stopped her. "The estate has security," he said. "Proper security. I have 4 people already on site. You and the children would be safer there than anywhere else in Monterey tonight. You want me to bring my children to your house? I want you to bring my children somewhere safe," he said. "The distinction matters to me." She looked at the back office door. Behind it, Lucas was almost certainly no longer looking at his tablet and was instead doing something structural to the furniture. Lily was probably reading. They were 5 years old. They had never had anything to be afraid of in Monterey, in all 4.5 years of it. She had made sure of that. She had made sure of that by running from the thing that had now apparently followed her anyway. 2 hours, she said. "I need to pack some things, and I need to explain to them that we're going somewhere tonight without it being frightening." 2 hours, Damien said. "I'll send a car." "I'll drive myself," she said. Another pause. "All right." She hung up and sat for a moment with the rag in her hand and the empty cafe around her and the sounds of her children in the back office. And she thought about the version of this evening she had imagined this morning. Closing up, going home, getting through the bedtime routine, lying awake thinking about Damien Blackwood's voice and the way he'd said, "I'm not leaving Monterey," and how far this actual evening had diverged from that version. She went to the back office. Lucas had, in fact, reorganized the furniture into something he described as a fortress. Lily was sitting in the middle of it with her book, apparently having decided that the fortress was a reasonable place to read. "We're going somewhere tonight," Claire said. Lucas looked up from the fortress wall he was reinforcing with a chair cushion. "Where?" "A house by the water. It belongs to someone I know." "The tall man," Lily said. It wasn't a question. Claire looked at her daughter. "Yes." Lucas abandoned the fortress wall immediately. "Does he have good snacks?" "I genuinely don't know," Claire said. They arrived at the Cliffside Estate at 9:15. The house was large and angular and glass-fronted, positioned on the edge of the headland with the ocean on 3 sides, lit from within in a way that made it look like something cut from a magazine. 2 men stood at the gate, big, quiet, professional, and waved Claire's car through without being asked. Damien met them at the front door. He had changed out of his wet overcoat into something dark and simple, and he looked in the door frame the way he always looked in any space he occupied, like the space had been arranged around him rather than the other way around. He looked at the twins with an expression Claire couldn't quite read, something tightly controlled that was working hard to stay that way. Lucas looked at the house. He looked at Damien. He said, "Do you have a trampoline?" "I don't," Damien said. "You should get one," Lucas said, and walked past him into the house. Lily stopped in front of Damien and looked up at him with the full, unguarded attention she normally reserved for books and problems. Then she said, "Your house smells like the ocean," and walked inside. Damien watched them go. Claire stopped beside him in the doorway. She was close enough that she could see the muscle in his jaw move once. "You okay?" she said, before she could think better of it. He looked at her sideways. Ask me in a week, he said. She went inside. The next 3 hours were strange in the way that impossible situations sometimes resolved themselves into something almost manageable through the sheer momentum of immediate practical necessity. Lucas needed to be shown the room he was staying in, needed to be convinced that the ocean outside the window was not going to come through it, needed to be fed the crackers Claire had packed because it turned out Damien's estate had a fully stocked kitchen managed by a caretaker, but not a lot of the specific brand of crackers that Lucas had decided were the only acceptable variety. Lily ate whatever was offered without comment and went to sleep in her room at 10:15 with a composure that was slightly unsettling. After the twins were settled, Claire found Damien in the kitchen. He was standing at the counter with a glass of water and his phone, reading something. He looked up when she came in. "They're both asleep," she said. He nodded. She sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the ocean, which was a constant low presence outside the glass walls. "Tell me what's happening," she said. "All of it." He put the phone down. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. And he told her, not everything. She understood there were levels of the Blackwood operation that she was never going to be given full access to, but enough. The Moretti organization. The rivalry that stretched back before Damien had taken over from his father. The particular quality of the Moretti family's grudges, which were patient and specific and generational. The fact that someone had fed Briggs's algorithm a data point designed to look like a routine hit to bring Damien to Monterey, to a location where the Morettis could observe his vulnerabilities before deciding how to apply pressure. "They found me first," Claire said. She felt sick saying it. "Before you did." "Possibly. Or they found me after I arrived and moved fast." He paused. "I don't know yet which it is. It matters." "Why?" "Because if they found you first, they've had weeks or months to prepare. If they found you after I arrived, they have 48 hours. He looked at her steadily. "One of those situations is significantly more manageable than the other." She pressed her palms flat on the table. "What do they want?" "To use what I care about," he said simply. "That's always what it comes down to. Men like Lorenzo Moretti don't fight in straight lines. They find pressure points." He paused. "They just found the two largest ones I have." The silence between them held the weight of that. "I didn't want this for them," Claire said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "I know. I didn't run because I was trying to take them from you," she said. "I want you to know that. I wasn't thinking clearly about... I wasn't thinking at all. I just ran." "I know," he said again. "You're not angry." He looked at the table for a moment. "I'm very angry," he said. "I'm choosing not to use it right now because it's not useful. That's not the same thing as not being angry." She looked at him. This was the thing she had forgotten, the thing that 5 years of distance had softened in her memory into something easier to live with. The specific texture of Damien Blackwood's self-control, the way he held everything at exactly the temperature that made it most effective. Never hot enough to be irrational, never cold enough to be absent. It had frightened her sometimes in the Manhattan years. It didn't frighten her now. Now it felt like the most solid surface in the room. "Victoria called me," she said. 2 days ago. Before you showed up." Damien's eyes came up immediately. She said she'd heard I was in California. She wanted to catch up." Claire watched his face carefully. "She said she'd been thinking about us. There was something off about it. She sounded rehearsed." "You didn't mention this earlier," Damien said. I was a little occupied with other things earlier." He stood up from the table. He picked up his phone. He moved to the window and stood looking at the dark ocean, and she could see the reflection of him in the glass, the way he was working through something fast and not liking where it was landing. "What?" she said. "Victoria has been in Chicago for 18 months, he said. He was still looking at the window. "I know this because I looked into your family periodically, as part of looking for you." He paused. "Chicago is where the Moretti organization is headquartered." Claire heard the sound the kitchen made, the refrigerator's low hum, the ocean, her own breathing. "That's a coincidence," she said. Damien turned from the window and looked at her. "That might be a coincidence," she said. "Tell me what she sounded like on the phone," he said. "Exactly." Claire thought back to the call. Victoria's voice, which she'd almost not recognized because Victoria had always been the louder of the two of them, sharper-edged, And on that call there had been something underneath the brightness of it that sounded stretched. She kept circling back to whether I was happy here, whether I had... She asked if I'd been seeing anyone, whether there was anyone important to me. She stopped. She asked about the kids. Damien set the phone on the counter. She didn't know about the twins, Claire said slowly. I never told her. I never contacted anyone from my old life. How did she know? She's been watching, Damien said. Or the people she's been talking to have been watching. His voice was very even. She called to confirm information, not to reconnect. The thing that moved through Claire then was not fear exactly. It was closer to the feeling of a floor you had trusted for years showing you, all at once, that it had been hollow underneath the whole time. Victoria. Her older sister. The person who had taken her in after their parents died when Claire was 16, who had driven her to art school applications, who had stood at every gallery opening with a glass of wine and that particular smile that was somehow both genuine and competitive at the same time. She was there, Claire said, 5 years ago, in the bedroom. I thought she orchestrated it, Damien said. He said it carefully, like he'd been sitting with it for a while and was only now saying it out loud because he had enough of the picture to say it. I don't know how much I can prove yet, but the timing, the call, Chicago, the way she positioned herself in that room, I had wondered afterward why she chose that particular moment when I knew you were supposed to be at the gallery. He paused. She knew when you'd be home. Claire was quiet. She wanted you gone, Damien said. She wanted me to believe you'd left voluntarily. And she has spent 5 years, it appears, making sure that whatever she started finished the way she intended it to. The kitchen was very still. She's my sister, Claire said. I know. She raised me. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to. I'm not asking you to do anything with this tonight. I'm telling you what I think is true so that you can be informed. Because the alternative is protecting you from the information, and I'm not going to do that. Claire looked at her hands on the table. She thought about the bedroom doorway, the shape of Victoria's hand on Damien's chest, the sound she'd thought she'd heard, the way she had not waited, the way she had been so certain, so quickly, in the way that people were certain when some part of them had already been prepared to believe a thing. Had Victoria prepared her for that? Had there been things said over months and years, gentle suggestions, small insinuations, the kind of thing that didn't register as manipulation because it came from the person you trusted most in the world? She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. I need to sleep, she said. Yes, Damien said. We can't resolve this tonight. No, she stood up. She was steadier than she expected to be. At the kitchen doorway, she stopped. The security here, she said. It's enough for tonight. It's enough, he said. She went to the room she'd been shown earlier. She lay down on top of the covers without getting undressed. She looked at the ceiling and listened to the ocean, and did not sleep for a very long time. In the morning, things moved fast. Damien had Briggs on a call at 6. The algorithm trace had come back with a result that wasn't possible if the system was clean. Someone with internal access had manually added a data weight to the Monterey DMV record 3 weeks ago. Time to surface in the next routine sweep, placed there by someone who had known both the system's parameters and the search schedule. There were 11 people who had that level of access. Damien had Briggs begin pulling communication records for all 11 before the call ended. At 7, Ethan Carter showed up at the estate gate. Damien's man at the gate called up to the house. Damien said let him wait. Then, after a moment, he said let him in. Ethan came into the front room looking like a man who had been awake for most of the night and had made some decisions he was going to see through regardless of what he walked into. He was in his work clothes, worn canvas jacket, boots still damp from the morning harbor. He looked at Damien standing in the center of the room, and he didn't look away. Where's Claire? He said. Upstairs, Damien said. Is she all right? She's fine. Ethan looked at him. I've known Claire for 4 years, he said. She doesn't scare easily. She was scared last night. She had reason to be. Because of you. Damien regarded him. Partially. Just partially, Ethan said. There are other factors, Damien said, which are my responsibility to resolve. Ethan stood in the center of the room with his jaw set and his hands loose at his sides, and Damien watched him with the patience of a man who understood exactly what this was and had no particular interest in making it uglier than it needed to be. Ethan Carter was a decent man. That was visible in everything about him. The way he'd come here this morning, the way he'd looked at Claire yesterday at the counter, the way he was standing here right now, not backing down but not escalating either, just standing his ground like a person who believed he had the right to. Decent men were the hardest kind to deal with. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what's happening here," Ethan said. "I'm not an idiot." "I know," Damien said. "She never talked about you. 4 years. Not once." "No," Damien said. "She wouldn't have." "But you have kids." He said it flat, like a fact he'd spent the night organizing. "Those 2 kids." "Yes." Ethan exhaled. He looked at the floor. He looked back up. "Does she want you here?" he said. "Does she actually want this, or is this something that's happening to her?" It was, Damien thought, an unexpectedly precise question. He considered it for a moment before he answered. "I think," he said, "that she's deciding. And while she's deciding, you've moved her and her children into your house. For security reasons that are real and immediate," Damien said, "not to apply pressure." "Those 2 things can both be true," Ethan said. "Yes," Damien said. "They can." The silence between them had a different quality than yesterday's silence. Yesterday had been territorial. This was something else. 2 men being more honest than the situation strictly required, because the woman upstairs warranted it. "If something happens to her," Ethan said, "because of whatever you've dragged in behind you, I'm holding you responsible for that." "So will I," Damien said. Ethan looked at him for another moment. Then he nodded once, not agreement exactly, but acknowledgement, and turned and walked back out. Damien stood in the empty front room and watched through the glass wall as Ethan's truck moved back down the cliff road. He heard Claire's footsteps on the stairs. She came into the room in yesterday's clothes, her hair down, looking like someone who had arrived at a particular kind of tired that was beyond ordinary tired. She had heard some of it. He could tell by the way she was looking at him. "You were decent to him," she said. "He's a decent man," Damien said. "It costs nothing." She stood at the edge of the room. "I can't stay here indefinitely," she said. "The cafe. The kids need routine. I can't let this—" His phone rang. He looked at it. "Briggs." He answered it and listened for 45 seconds without speaking, his face moving through something she couldn't track. A sequence of expressions that were too controlled to read clearly, but underneath them was something cold arriving. He ended the call. "What?" Claire said. Damien looked at her. "The person who weighted the algorithm," he said. "The one who made sure I found Monterey on the schedule that fit someone else's plan." "Who?" "It was someone inside my organization," he said. "Someone who's been in my organization for 3 years and has had full access to operational intelligence for the last 18 months. He paused. "She was placed there by Victoria." The room was very quiet. "She's been inside your operation," Claire said slowly. "For 3 years." "Yes." "Which means she's known everything. Where your vulnerabilities are, how your systems work, how to manipulate what you see, and when." Claire's voice was perfectly level in the way that things went level when they were about to break. "She didn't just stage a misunderstanding 5 years ago, Damien. She's been building this the whole time." "Yes," he said. "She knew you'd come here eventually. She helped you come here, on her timeline, when she was ready." "Yes." "What is she ready for?" Claire said. Damien's phone buzzed again, a text this time. He read it. His face went to something she had never seen on it before. Not anger, not cold precision. Something that was further underneath both of those things, in the place where the man lived before all the learned control. He looked up. "The cafe," he said. Claire was already moving. "Claire!" He caught her arm, not hard, just enough to stop her from getting to the door first. "My people are already there. Listen to me." His grip was firm, and his voice was the steadiest thing in the room. "The children are upstairs. They are safe. My people are at the cafe. Nothing has happened yet." "Yet," she said. He held her gaze. His phone buzzed a third time. He read it, and the thing that happened in his face in the next 2 seconds was something Claire was going to remember for a very long time. A door closing, something interior going very quiet and very cold. A man she recognized retreating to a place underneath himself that she had only ever glimpsed before. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. The text was from an unknown number. It was 4 words and a photograph. The photograph was of Victoria. She was standing outside the Anchor Cafe. She was smiling at the camera. The 4 words read, "She says hello, Damien." Damien was already moving before Claire finished reading the screen. He crossed the front room in 4 strides and had his earpiece in by the time he reached the hallway, his voice dropping into something flat and operational that Claire had never heard directed at her before, had only ever heard at a distance, on the rare occasions when the Manhattan life had bled into the edges of the domestic one, and she'd caught half a phone call through a closed door. "Reyes is made," he said into the earpiece. "Pull back from the cafe. Maintain visual only. Do not engage. I need a full perimeter on the estate, both access roads. Nobody moves without my confirmation." A pause, walking fast toward the estate's security room at the far end of the ground floor. "And find me a location on Victoria Whitmore. Phone, vehicle, whatever you have. 5 minutes." Claire followed him. The security room was small and bright, banks of monitors showing the estate's camera feeds. Gate, cliff road, the rocky headland on 3 sides, the front approach. A man named Garrett, who had the compact build of someone who had spent a decade making himself useful in confined spaces, was already at the console, pulling feeds. Damien stopped in the doorway and looked at the cafe camera feed on the second monitor. The Anchor Cafe sat quiet in the early morning light. The sign was still off. The chairs were still up on the tables inside. The street in front was empty. No Victoria. She'd been there long enough to take a photograph and send it, long enough to announce herself. And now she was gone, which was worse. "She's not there," Claire said. "No," Damien said. "She wanted you to know she could get there," Claire said. That's what that was. Damien looked at the feed without answering, which was its own answer. Claire thought about her cafe, the pale blue apron hanging on the hook by the kitchen door, the worn wooden counter, the corner booth where Lily read and Lucas built things. She had spent 4.5 years making that place into something that felt safe. It had taken Victoria approximately 45 seconds to make it feel like a target. "I need to call her," Claire said. Damien turned. "She's my sister," Claire said. "Whatever she's done, she'll talk to me. She's always talked to me. That's never changed." "That's exactly why you shouldn't call her," Damien said. "She knows how to use you. She's been using you." "Then let her use me," Claire said. "Let her think she's using me. I can get her talking. I can get her to tell me." "You're not trained for this," he said, not unkindly, just as a fact. "I know her," Claire said. "You don't. You've been in the same room with her twice. I grew up with her. I know every tell she has, every way she constructs a lie, the specific way her voice changes when she's frightened versus when she's performing." She held his gaze. "You have resources I don't have. I have something you don't have. Let me use it." The silence lasted 4 seconds. "Speaker," he said, "and you let me listen to the full call." Claire took out her phone. Victoria answered on the second ring, which meant she had been expecting it, which meant everything about this had already been arranged to happen in this exact sequence. Her voice was warm in the specific manufactured way that Claire now understood she should have recognized years ago. "Claire," she said, "I was wondering when you'd call." "I saw the photograph," Claire said. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "Pretty little cafe," Victoria said. "You've built something nice there. I always knew you had that in you, the domestic thing, making a home out of nothing." "What do you want, Victoria?" A pause. The kind of pause that was performing thought while actually landing a step. "I want what's best for you," she said. "What I've always wanted. For you to be safe and away from people who'll bring you into situations you're not equipped for." "People like Damien." "Exactly like Damien," Victoria said, and her voice shifted. Not into something colder exactly, but into something more honest in a way that was its own kind of alarm. "He's here now, isn't he? At that estate on the cliff. I imagine he's standing very close to you right now, listening to this call, because that's how he operates, making sure he's the one with the most information in the room at all times." Claire looked at Damien. He was looking at the phone, his face giving nothing. "You've been watching us," Claire said. "I've been making sure you're protected," Victoria said. "From a man who runs a criminal organization that has enemies, Claire. Real enemies. People who would use you and those children to get to him without a second thought." "Like the Morettis," Claire said. The pause this time was different, shorter and tighter, the kind of pause that happened when something landed that wasn't supposed to. "He's told you about the Morettis," Victoria said. "He's told me about a lot of things," Claire said, "including Chicago, including the past 3 years." She kept her voice level. "How long, Victoria? How long have you been working with them?" "That's a very specific word," Victoria said. "Working with. I'd call it, how long?" Silence. "You staged the whole thing," Claire said. "The bedroom. You knew exactly when I'd be home from the gallery. You'd been setting it up for months, hadn't you? All those little things you said about him, the way you'd look at me sometimes when he called. You were building something in me so that when you gave me the image, I'd already believe it." She heard Victoria exhale. It was not the exhale of a person who'd been caught. It was the exhale of a person who was relieved to be done pretending. "You were wasting yourself," Victoria said. "That's what you never understood. You had real talent, real potential, and you were shrinking yourself around that man, fitting yourself into the corners of his life, waiting for him to let you be more than decoration in a very dangerous world." "You decided that for me," Claire said. "I decided to give you an exit," Victoria said. "I gave you a reason to leave that you'd actually believe. Because if I'd told you the truth, that staying with him was going to get you killed, you wouldn't have listened. You never listened when it was about him. So you destroyed 5 years of our lives instead," Claire said. "Mine, his, your niece and nephew, who have grown up without their father." "They've grown up safe," Victoria said sharply. "They've grown up without—" "Safe," Victoria said again, harder. "Do you understand what that means in his world, Claire? Do you understand what kind of target you become when you're the woman Damian Blackwood loves? I protected you. I protected those children from being used as leverage the exact same way they're being used as leverage right now, today, because he found you and brought all of this directly to your door." The line was quiet. Damian was looking at the middle distance over Claire's shoulder. His jaw was set. The muscle in it moved once. "What do you want?" Claire said again. "I want him to step back," Victoria said, and the warmth was completely gone now, replaced by something precise and cold. "I want him to acknowledge that he has no claim on a life that exists entirely apart from him. I want him to return to his empire and leave you and those children in peace." "And if he doesn't," Claire said. Victoria said nothing. "Victoria, what happens if he doesn't?" "Then the people I've been talking to," Victoria said, "are going to make very sure that Damian Blackwood understands the cost of not listening when he's been asked nicely." A pause. "They're not patient men, Claire. I've done what I can to keep this from becoming something that can't be walked back. But that window is closing." The call ended. Claire lowered the phone. The security room was very quiet. Garrett was looking at his console. Damian was looking at Claire with an expression that she had no clean category for, something between cold fury and something much older and heavier than fury. "She believes it," Claire said. "That's the worst part. She genuinely believes she was protecting me. She believes it enough to have placed an operative inside my organization for 3 years," Damian said. "Belief doesn't make it anything other than what it is." He turned to Garrett. "Pull everything you have on Victoria Whitmore's movement in the last 48 hours. Wherever she's staying, whoever she's been in contact with, I want it cross-referenced against every known Moretti associate in the state." He paused. "And get me Lorenzo." Garrett looked up. "You want to contact Moretti directly?" "I want him to know that I know," Damian said. "That's different from contact." He walked out of the security room. Claire followed him into the hallway, where the morning light came through the glass and made everything look clear and cold and without shadows, which was a lie particular to certain kinds of California mornings. "Damian," she caught his arm. He stopped. "She's not going to just be persuaded to step back. You know that." "Yes," he said. "And Lorenzo Moretti isn't going to back down because you know he's there." "No," he said. "He's going to escalate because that's what the Morettis do when they're committed. They push until the thing breaks." He looked at her. "Which means we're in a different situation than we were this morning." How different? He considered this. He was choosing exactly how to say it, which meant what he was going to say was something she needed to hear and didn't particularly want to. "Victoria gave them a map," he said. 3 years of access to my organizational structure. They know my people, my response patterns, my financial vulnerabilities. They know how I react to threats to my personal life because Victoria has given them a detailed study of exactly that. He paused. I've been outmaneuvered, at a strategic level. I need to recognize that before I can start moving in a direction that isn't what they've already planned for. Claire looked at him. The man I am when I operate normally, he said carefully, is the man they've been preparing for. They know how to counter him, which means I need to be something else. She didn't know what to say to that. Lucas's voice came from upstairs. Not frightened, just awake and loud in the particular full-volume way of a 5-year-old announcing the morning. Lily's quieter voice underneath it. The sounds of children doing morning things, entirely unaware that the building they were sleeping in was the center of a situation that had been 3 years in the making. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, Damien was looking at the ceiling in the direction of the sound, and the expression on his face was the one she'd glimpsed the night before. Unguarded, in the moment before he caught himself. Something that had no armor on it. I need to go up, she said. Go, he said. She went upstairs. She got the twins through the morning in the estate's oversized kitchen, where Lucas discovered that Damien's caretaker kept a supply of a cereal brand that Lucas identified as superior to anything available at home, which immediately elevated Damien's standing in Lucas's estimation to a degree that Claire found both touching and inconvenient. Lily ate her cereal and watched the ocean through the kitchen's glass wall with the attention she normally reserved for complex books. At some point, Damien appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had his phone in his hand and had clearly been on calls for the past hour. He looked at the twins with the same carefully managed expression and then looked at Claire with a question in it. She shook her head slightly. Not yet. He nodded and disappeared. At 10, Garrett came upstairs. He spoke to Damien in the hallway outside the kitchen, low enough that Claire caught only fragments. Location confirmed, moving vehicles, a name she didn't recognize, followed by a number that might have been a street address. Damien's responses were monosyllabic and very fast. Garrett went back downstairs. Damien came into the kitchen. He looked at Lucas and Lily with the deliberateness of a man making a specific decision. Can you two do something for me? He said. Lucas looked up from his cereal. What? There's a room at the end of the hallway upstairs, Damien said. Behind the last door on the left. It has a window that looks straight down at the water, and there's a cabinet in the corner that has things in it from when the previous owner's kids used to stay here. Art supplies, some games. I haven't opened it in the 3 hours I've owned this house, so I can't tell you exactly what's in there. Lucas was already getting down from his chair. Lily, Damien said. Lily looked at him. There are bookshelves in that room too, he said. Lily got down from her chair. They disappeared down the hallway. Damien watched them go and then turned to Claire, and the version of him that appeared when the twins were out of sight was different, stripped of the extra care, fully operational, not cold, but very focused. Briggs found the mole, he said, a woman named Sandra Park. 3 years with the organization placed by Victoria through a consulting firm that was a Moretti front. He paused. She's been quarantined. She's not the problem anymore. Then what is? Claire said. What she had access to, Damien said, specifically, movement schedules. Mine, for the next 2 weeks, filed 3 days ago based on plans I'd made before I came here. He looked at her steadily. Before I knew about Monterey. Plans that were built around a different set of assumptions. What kind of plans? She said. I was supposed to be in Chicago next Thursday, he said. Meetings with 3 organizational partners. Scheduled months ago. Non-negotiable in the normal sense, because canceling without explanation would read as weakness to people I can't afford to have reading weakness. Chicago, she said. Chicago, he said. Where the Moretti family is based. Where Victoria has been for 18 months. Where a meeting between me and 3 partners who have now potentially been compromised by Moretti intelligence. He stopped. It's a trap, Claire said. It was always a trap, he said. I just didn't know I was already walking toward it. He sat down at the kitchen table, the first time she'd seen him sit down since the night before, and there was something in it that was different from his usual stillness. He put both hands flat on the table. I've spent 20 years not being predictable, he said. It's the thing I'm most careful about. And in 3 years, she walked someone inside my operation who learned every pattern I have, and now they know exactly where I'm going to be in 6 days. Claire sat across from him. Cancel the Chicago trip, she said. If I cancel, they know I know, he said. They adjust. They move whatever they've built to a different timeline, a different location, and I lose the only advantage I currently have, which is that they don't know the mole has been found. He looked at her. If I go to Chicago and I walk into a room that's been prepared for me, he didn't finish it. He didn't need to. The kitchen was very quiet. From somewhere at the end of the upstairs hallway came the sound of Lucas finding the art supply cabinet and announcing its contents at full volume. There's a third option, Claire said. Damien looked at her. Let me call Victoria back, she said. Not to negotiate, not to give her anything, but to set something up. She watched his face. She wants to talk to me. She's been wanting to talk to me for 5 years. Everything she's done has been about getting me away from you, which means at some level, this has always been about me as much as it has been about you. If I give her what looks like an opening, she'll use you, he said. I know, Claire said, but I'll know she's using me, and I'll know what she wants. And you can use what I know. She held his gaze. You said you need to be something different than what they've prepared for. They've prepared for Damien Blackwood, the Mafia Boss. They haven't prepared for Damien Blackwood operating on information they don't know he has, through a channel they think they control. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. It was not comfortable, whatever it was. You're asking me to put you in the middle of this, he said. I'm already in the middle of it, she said. She made sure of that 3 years ago when she put someone inside your organization specifically designed to get to those children. I'm not stepping into something. I've been in it. I'd rather be in it with information than in it blind. Damien looked at the table. He looked at it for a long time. His phone buzzed. He read the message. Something in his face changed in a way that made Claire's chest tighten before she knew why. He turned the phone around. It was a photograph again. The same unknown number as before. But this photograph was not of Victoria outside the cafe. It was of the Anchor Cafe from inside. The kitchen, the back office where she sent the twins when things happened that she didn't want them to see. Taken recently, she could tell by the specific position of a mug she'd left on the counter 2 days ago, before any of this began. Someone had been inside her cafe. Not this morning. Before. Before Damien arrived. Before the man at the window table, before any of it had surfaced into something visible. They had been inside and they had photographed the place where her children spent their afternoons. And they had held on to that photograph, and they had sent it now, at this exact moment, to make a point that did not require words. Below the photograph was a single line of text. Thursday, Damien, Chicago, or we stop being patient. Claire's hands were flat on the table. She could feel her pulse in them, which was not something she normally felt. Damien picked the phone back up. His face had gone to that place. The deep place, the one underneath everything, where the man who had built an empire and buried people and survived things that would have ended anyone without his particular construction lived when the situation required him. He stood up from the table. He walked to the kitchen window and looked at the ocean for a moment, and Claire watched his reflection in the glass. The set of his shoulders, the way he was breathing, the slow, deliberate quality of a man who was taking the full measure of the thing in front of him before he decided how to meet it. He turned around. I need to make some calls, he said. I need you to stay in this house with the children until I tell you otherwise. Not because I'm managing you, because what I'm about to start doing requires knowing exactly where you are. What are you about to start doing? She said. He looked at her for a moment. Becoming something they haven't prepared for, he said. He walked out of the kitchen, and Claire sat alone at the table with the photograph still on the screen in front of her. The interior of her cafe, the back office, the small space where her children ate shortbread cookies and built rubber band balls and existed in the safe, ordinary life she had constructed for them. And she understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that the past had not merely caught up with her. It had been waiting inside her life the whole time, patient and prepared. And it had just shown her exactly how long it had been there. And the thing that moved through her then was not panic and not grief, but something older and harder than both. The specific, focused anger of a mother who has just been shown the photograph of a room where her children sleep, sent as a threat, by someone who had been watching them without her knowledge, and who had been doing it for long enough that they felt comfortable enough to use it as leverage now. At this particular moment, when the person she needed most was standing 20 feet away, becoming something none of them had seen yet, and she wasn't sure whether what she felt about that was fear or the first clear pulse of something that felt, for the first time in 5 years, like relief. That was the word that had been forming in her when Damien walked out of the kitchen. Not comfort, not safety, not anything as soft as hope. Relief. The raw, stripped-down version of it. The kind that came not from things getting better, but from finally being done pretending they were fine. She sat with it for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and called Victoria back. Victoria answered before the first ring finished, which meant she'd been holding the phone. "Claire? I want to meet," Claire said. "Just us. No Damien, no your people, no photographs sent to make points. You and me, somewhere public today." Silence. "Why?" Victoria said. "Because you're my sister," Claire said. "And because I'm looking at a photograph of the inside of my cafe and trying to decide whether the person who took it is someone I should be terrified of or someone who did it because she was frightened and didn't know how else to make me listen." She paused. "Which one is it, Victoria?" A longer silence. "The harbor," Victoria said. "There's a bench at the north end of the public pier. 2 hours." The call ended. Claire put the phone down and went to find Damien. He was in the security room with Garrett and 2 other men she hadn't been introduced to, standing over a table with printed maps and handwritten notes and the specific organized chaos of people who were moving fast in a coordinated direction. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. She told him what she'd done. The room went quiet, and the way rooms went quiet when someone did something that changed the parameters. 2 hours, he said. "Yes. She'll have people there." "I know." "She's not meeting you to reconcile," he said. "She's meeting you to gather information about where I am and what I know." "I know that too," Claire said. "Does she? So will you put someone there or not?" He looked at her for 3 full seconds. "Every person I put on that pier is a person they can identify," he said. "They've had 3 years of my organizational chart. They know my faces." He paused. "You'd be walking into a location that she controls with people I can't effectively counter without revealing that I know more than they think I know." "Then don't put anyone there," Claire said. "Let me go alone and wear a wire and come back with whatever she gives me." "Claire." "She won't hurt me," Claire said. "Whatever she's become, whatever she's done, I was 16 when our parents died, Damien. She held me together for 2 years. She will not hurt me in person on a public pier." He looked at the map on the table. He looked back at her. "There's a boat," he said finally. "Commercial fishing vessel, been working this harbor for 4 years. Captain owes me a debt from a situation in Seattle that I resolved for him. He can be offshore from the North Pier within 40 minutes and hold position. Line of sight, close enough to move fast if needed." He looked at her. "That's what I can give you." "That's enough," Claire said. It wasn't enough, and they both knew it, but it was the honest version of the situation, and the honest version was what they were working with. She went upstairs. Lucas was constructing something elaborate out of the contents of the art supply cabinet, using a logic that was entirely his own. Lily was reading in the window seat, the ocean behind her, 1 foot tucked under her knee. Claire sat on the edge of the window seat. Lily looked up. "I have to go out for a little while," Claire said. Lily looked at her with those eyes. "You're going to see the woman from before," she said. Claire went still. "What woman?" "The one who called the other day," Lily said. "You made your face go flat when you answered. You only do that with people you're working at being normal around." She went back to her book. "Be careful." Claire sat for a moment on the window seat with her daughter reading next to her and the ocean filling the glass behind them, and she thought about the 16-year-old version of herself and the way Victoria had held her together after the worst thing, and she thought about the photograph of her cafe's back office sent as a threat. And she tried to hold both of those things in the same space and understand how they belonged to the same person. She couldn't. Maybe that was the answer. She kissed Lily's hair. She went back downstairs, let one of Damien's people wire her with a device so small she couldn't feel it after the first 30 seconds, and drove to the harbor. The North Pier was quiet at midday. A few tourists at the far end with cameras pointed at the water. A bait shop doing slow business. The smell of diesel and salt and cold fish that was the permanent condition of every working harbor Claire had ever been to. Victoria was already there. She was sitting on the bench at the end of the pier with her hands in the pockets of a cream-colored coat that was too nice for Monterey weather, her dark hair cut shorter than Claire remembered, her posture the specific upright posture of a woman who had decided how she was going to be perceived and was maintaining it actively. She looked up when Claire approached. She looked older. Not the same way Claire looked older, not worn down, but sharpened, the way certain people got sharper under pressure instead of softer. "You look good," Victoria said. "You sent a photograph of my children's playroom as a threat," Claire said. She sat down on the bench. "I sent it as a demonstration," Victoria said. "Of what? Of how long this has been in place?" Victoria said. "Of what that man brought to your door the moment he found you. Those images were taken 8 months ago, Claire. 8 months. Before Damian Blackwood knew you existed in this town. Before any of this was visible." She looked at her. "That is not a threat. That is a fact. The Moretti organization has known where you were for 8 months because they followed me and I led them here. And I have spent 8 months managing that relationship to make sure they kept their distance from you." Claire looked at her. "You've been managing them," she said. "Containing them," Victoria said. "There's a difference." She shifted on the bench, and for the first time she looked like something other than composed, something underneath the cream coat and the precise posture that was working hard. "The Morettis found you because they were looking for anything connected to Damian. I found out 8 months ago. I made a choice. I could tell you, which meant telling Damian, which meant exactly this. Him descending on your life with his war behind him. Or I could get inside their operation close enough to make sure they treated you as a protected asset instead of a leverage point. By becoming an asset to them yourself," Claire said. "Yes," Victoria said. "That's what you've been telling yourself," Claire said. "That's what I've been doing," Victoria said, and her voice had an edge in it now. "Whatever you think of the means, those children have been in this town for 4.5 years, and nothing has touched them. Not one thing. Do you understand what I've had to do to maintain that? And Damian's organization," Claire said. "The operative you placed inside it, Sandra Park." Victoria's face changed. Only slightly, only for a second, but Claire had spent a lifetime reading the small changes in her sister's face, and she saw it. The specific flicker of someone who has just been told something they didn't expect to be told. "He found her," Victoria said. It wasn't a question. "Yesterday," Claire said. Victoria looked at the water. "That accelerates things," she said quietly. "Victoria." Claire kept her voice flat. "Sandra Park was not about protecting me. Placing someone inside Damian's organization to monitor his movement schedules and his vulnerabilities, that's not protection. That's operational intelligence for the Moretti family." "It's both," Victoria said. "I needed to give them something to maintain my position inside their trust. I gave them access that I could control, information I could manage." She looked back at Claire. "I never gave them anything that would have gotten you or the children hurt." "But you gave them Chicago," Claire said. The silence on the pier had a specific quality. A gull somewhere overhead, the slap of water against the pilings below. "He told you about Chicago," Victoria said. "Thursday," Claire said. "A room full of compromised partners and a Moretti welcome party." She watched her sister's face. "You built that. That's not managing a situation to protect me, Victoria. That's building a mechanism to remove Damian Blackwood permanently." Victoria's hands came out of her coat pockets. She put them in her lap. She looked at them for a moment. "He's going to get you killed," she said. It came out quietly, without the architecture of the argument she'd been making, just the thing underneath all of it, raw and specific and old. Not because he wants to, because that's what loving someone like Damian Blackwood costs. I watched it happen to his father's wife. I researched it when you first started seeing him. Woman after woman, Claire, connected to men in that world, and what happens to them. She looked up. "I was not going to watch that happen to you." "So you were going to have him killed," Claire said. "I was going to have him removed from your life," Victoria said. "Whether he walked away or—" She stopped. "Say it," Claire said. Victoria looked at her for a long moment. "I made a decision 5 years ago to give you a chance at something different," she said. "And you built something. You built a real life, Claire. Those 2 kids are healthy and bright and safe, and you built that. All of that is real. She paused. I was trying to make sure it stayed real. By killing their father, Claire said, by removing a man who would have eventually... He spent 5 years trying to find me, Claire said. Her voice finally had something in it. Not heat, but weight. The kind of weight that came from carrying something for a long time and finally being able to set it down in front of someone. He thought I was dead, Victoria. He grieved me. He never stopped looking. That's not a man who was going to let me go or move on or find something else. That is a man who... She stopped. You took that from us. 5 years. You took it deliberately, and then you told yourself it was protection. Victoria looked away. Call them off, Claire said. Chicago. Whatever is planned for Thursday. Call it off. I can't, Victoria said. I don't have that kind of authority. I'm not in their structure that way. I'm a source, not a commander. Then tell me who is, Claire said. Tell me something I can bring back that Damien can use. Victoria looked at her sharply. You're running an operation on me right now. You ran one on me for 5 years, Claire said. Tell me something useful. Something that helps us end this without anyone dying. Because the alternative is Damien doing what Damien does when people threaten his family. And you know enough about that to understand how that ends. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. A couple walked past the bench toward the end of the pier, not looking at them. A man and a woman in tourist clothes with a camera. Victoria watched them pass, and something in her went very still. Those aren't tourists, she said quietly. Claire looked. The woman has an earpiece, Victoria said. Her voice had changed, stripped of everything, just the flat, bare fact of it. Claire, those are not Damien's people. I know his faces. She stood up slowly, not moving fast, keeping her hands visible. We need to leave this pier. What? The Morettis know I'm here, Victoria said. I told them I was managing you. They sent oversight. She was looking down the pier with a steadiness that was not calm, but was functioning as calm. They don't trust me. They've been watching me, which means they've been listening to this conversation. Claire stood up. Don't run, Victoria said. Don't look at them again. Walk with me toward the shore end of the pier, normal pace. They walked. Claire's heart was doing something that was not a normal heartbeat. It was faster and harder, and she could feel it in her throat, which was new and unpleasant. She was watching the boards of the pier under her feet and counting her own steps, and she had 30 yards to the shore end, and there were 2 people behind her who had heard everything she'd just said, including the part about the wire. 15 yards, Victoria said very quietly without moving her lips much. The wire. Whoever is listening, tell them the North Pier now, both ends. 10 yards. The couple behind them had stopped walking. Claire could feel it without looking. The absence of footsteps that had been there a second ago. Hey! A man's voice behind them, not aggressive, just definitive. The kind of voice that was used to being the last voice in a room. They stopped. Claire turned. The man in the tourist clothes was not a tourist in any way that held up under direct examination. Late 30s, the compact stillness of someone trained, a jaw that hadn't softened since whenever it last could. The woman beside him had the earpiece in her left ear and her right hand at her jacket pocket. Ms. Whitmore, the man said. He was looking at Victoria. Mr. Moretti would like a word. I told him I was handling this, Victoria said. He appreciates that, the man said. He'd still like a word. He looked at Claire. You too. Claire looked at the man's face and understood, in the specific way that certain moments of understanding arrived, not gradually but all at once, complete, that the wire was not going to matter, that the boat offshore was not going to matter, that she had walked out onto this pier with a plan that was already obsolete by the time she sat down on that bench. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She looked down at it. The man said, "Leave it." She looked up. Damien's name was on the screen. She left it. They walked off the pier, Victoria on her left, the 2 Moretti people behind them, and got into a dark SUV that was idling at the harbor parking lot's far edge, and the doors closed, and the harbor disappeared through the tinted windows as the vehicle pulled out. And Claire sat in the back seat with her hands in her lap, and Victoria beside her not speaking, and the wire against her ribs that was either still transmitting or had been identified and jammed, and she had no way to know which. She thought about Lucas's rubber band ball. She thought about Lily in the window seat with the ocean behind her, saying, "Be careful." She thought about Damien's face when he'd looked at the ceiling in the direction of their voices that morning. She thought about 5 years and what they cost, and what they couldn't give back, and she was done thinking about those things, done carrying them as weight, because that was over now. That particular grief had used up its time, and she was not going to spend whatever came next looking backward. The SUV drove north along the coast road, away from town. The harbor shrank in the rear window and then disappeared. 45 minutes later, the vehicle turned off the main road onto a gravel track that led toward a cluster of industrial buildings set back from the water. Old structures, the kind that had been something functional once and had been left to become useful for other purposes. The SUV stopped. The doors opened. They were walked inside. The warehouse was large and cold and smelled of seawater and metal, and the specific stale quality of a space that had been prepared for a purpose rather than inhabited for one. Lighting had been set up, temporary, industrial, the kind that lit a space without warming it. There were men positioned at intervals that were not casual. At the far end, standing on a raised concrete platform with his hands in his jacket pockets, was a man Claire had never seen before, who was immediately recognizable as someone accustomed to being the most significant person in any given room. Lorenzo Moretti was younger than she'd expected. Mid-40s, dark-featured, a face that had the quality of never having needed to perform anything because the authority was structural. He watched them walk toward him with the patience of a man for whom patience was not a virtue, but a weapon. Victoria stopped 10 feet from the platform. Claire stopped beside her. "Ms. Whitmore," Lorenzo said, looking at Claire. He had a slight Chicago inflection layered under something more careful. "I've heard a great deal about you." "I can't say the same," Claire said. He almost smiled. "Your sister has been a valuable resource," he said. "Strategic, careful. I have genuine respect for what she's accomplished." He looked at Victoria. "Which is why I'm disappointed that she appears to have been having a more complete conversation with you on that pier than the one she reported." Victoria's face didn't change. "I told her what she needed to hear," Victoria said, "to maintain her cooperation." "She told you about Sandra Park," Lorenzo said. "She told you about Chicago. She asked you to call it off." He looked at Claire. "And you asked her to give you something useful to bring back to Damien Blackwood." He paused. "That's not maintaining cooperation. That's working against the structure." "She's my sister," Victoria said, with a flatness that was its own kind of argument. "Yes," Lorenzo said. "That's the problem." He stepped down from the platform. He was not tall, but he moved with the compact certainty of someone who had never been uncertain about whether a room was his. He stopped in front of Claire. "Where's Blackwood now?" "I don't know," Claire said. "You were staying at his estate on the cliff road," he said, "as of this morning." "I drove myself to the harbor," she said. "I don't know where he is." He looked at her for a moment with an assessment that was not hostile but was very thorough. "I'm going to ask you to call him," he said, "and to tell him that you and your sister are here, and to give him an address." "So he comes here," Claire said. "So we resolve this," Lorenzo said. "Cleanly. One conversation. What he's going to offer us for the return of his family is going to be reasonable, because Damien Blackwood is a reasonable man when the alternative is made sufficiently clear." He looked at her. "And then this is over." Claire looked at the room, the men at the walls, the industrial lighting, the two people who'd walked them off the pier standing near the entrance. Victoria beside her, jaw set, eyes forward. She looked at Lorenzo. "He already knows," she said. Lorenzo looked at her. "The wire," she said. "It was transmitting the whole time. He heard everything on the pier. He knows this address. Or his people have already found it from the vehicle's route, because that's what his people do." She held Lorenzo's gaze. "He's not coming here because you invited him. He's coming here because his children's mother is in this building, and there is not a version of the next 2 hours in which that man does not walk through that door." The warehouse was very quiet. Lorenzo looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at the entrance. Then he looked back at Claire. And what was in his face now was not the patience as weapon that had been there before, but something else. A man recalculating, fast. A man who had built a careful plan and was now hearing the specific sound of it. The sound Lorenzo Moretti was hearing was the sound of a plan coming apart at the load-bearing points. He stood in the center of his prepared warehouse with its prepared lighting and its positioned men and looked at Claire Whitmore, who had just told him with a steadiness that he had not anticipated from a woman who had been walked off a public pier at gunpoint, that the man he'd spent 3 years engineering toward this moment was already in motion and was not moving on Lorenzo's timeline, but his own. Lorenzo turned to the man nearest the entrance. "Lock it down," he said. "Both doors. Now." The man moved. Victoria turned to Claire, and what was in her face was not the composed architecture of the past several hours, but something stripped and raw underneath it. "How much did he hear?" she said quietly. "Everything," Claire said, "or enough." "He can't come in here," Victoria said. "If he comes in here with people, it becomes something that can't be—" "I know," Claire said. "You said it to provoke Lorenzo," Victoria said. "I said it because it's true," Claire said. The warehouse had changed quality in the last 30 seconds. The men at the walls had come to a different kind of attention. Not the waiting attention of before, but something active, hands moving, positions shifting. Lorenzo was on a phone, his voice low and rapid. And whatever he was hearing back was not what he wanted to hear because his jaw set in a way that answered the question of whether the wire had been transmitting. It had been transmitting. Damien had heard the pier. He had heard the vehicle. He had the address, or he was close enough to it that the difference was academic. Then all of the warehouse's lights went out simultaneously. The darkness was total for 3 seconds, the particular absolute dark of an industrial space with no windows. And in those 3 seconds, Claire felt Victoria's hand close around her wrist and pull, hard, sideways, moving fast in the dark, with the certainty of someone who had been in this building before and had already identified where she needed to go if this happened. The emergency lighting kicked on, red-tinted, low, casting everything in the color of something urgent. The entrance doors came open. Not the way doors opened when people walked through them. The way doors opened when people who were very good at this made them open, fast and simultaneous, and from both ends at once. The kind of coordinated entry that took timing and communication, and people who had done it before in conditions considerably worse than a cold California warehouse. Damien's people came in from both sides. What happened next lasted approximately 4 minutes, and was not clean, and was not cinematic in any way that the word cinematic implied grace or choreography. It was 4 minutes of close quarters and shouted commands, and the sounds of men who had committed to a direction running into men who had committed to a different direction. And the red emergency lighting made everything the color of the inside of a fist. Claire and Victoria were against the far wall, Victoria's body half in front of Claire's in a posture that was instinctive and old, the same posture Claire realized in the fractured way you realize things in the middle of chaos, that Victoria had used when they were children and something frightening happened. Still, after everything, still that. Lorenzo had moved to the platform. He had 2 men tight on either side of him and a phone in his hand that he was no longer using because whatever communication infrastructure he'd had was gone. She could tell by the way he was looking at the room, the specific look of a man whose preparation has just become irrelevant. Damien came through the east entrance. He came in the way she had only ever understood theoretically before this moment. She had known, in the abstract, what he was, what the organization was, what the version of him that ran it looked like in operation. She had known the way you knew things about weather systems before you stood in one. Standing against the wall in the red emergency light, watching him move through his own people toward the center of the warehouse, she understood the difference between knowing and knowing. He was looking for her. He found her in approximately 6 seconds, and the moment he did, the moment their eyes connected across the warehouse floor, something in him visibly recalibrated. Not softer, just differently oriented, like a compass that had been moving and had found north. He crossed to her. He put one hand on her face, briefly, a check. Real, physical, present. "You're all right," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. He took his hand back. He turned to look at Lorenzo Moretti on the platform. The warehouse had resolved itself into a static situation. Damien's people in control of the room's perimeters, Lorenzo's men contained, nobody moving. The 4 minutes of noise had produced this. An ending that looked like a conversation because both men were still standing, and the alternative to conversation had not yet become necessary. Damien walked to the platform. He stopped 10 feet from Lorenzo and looked at him the way he'd looked at the table that morning. taking the full measure before speaking. 3 years, Damien said. Closer to 4, Lorenzo said. His voice was even. The composure was real. Claire could see that. Whatever else Lorenzo Moretti was, he was not a man who fell apart when situations moved against him. You placed someone in my organization, Damien said. You've been in my operational structure, my scheduling, my financial architecture, my people. He paused. And you chose to use it to take a woman and 2 children off a public pier. I chose to create a conversation, Lorenzo said. The alternative was Chicago, which would have been considerably less comfortable for both of us. There was no Chicago, Damien said, not the version you built. You put me in a room with 3 partners you believed you'd compromised. 2 of them came to me last week with what you'd offered them, because whatever you offered was not more valuable than what they'd lose by taking it. He watched Lorenzo absorb this. The 3rd one I'd already cut 6 months ago for unrelated reasons. You were building a trap in a room I was never going to be in. Silence. Sandra Park, Damien continued. Whatever she gave you, I've known the breach existed for 3 months. I've been feeding her information that was specifically constructed for this situation. He paused. The movement schedule she passed you, the security protocols, the financial vulnerabilities, all of it was built for you to receive. Lorenzo's composure remained intact, but something behind it had changed. You walked into Monterey, Damien said. I know that feels like your move. It wasn't. He paused. This conversation is my move. And what do you want from this conversation? Lorenzo said. For it to be the last one, Damien said. I want to establish clearly and in a form that will hold that what exists in Monterey is outside the scope of anything between us, permanently, not as a negotiated position, as a line. And what do I get for respecting this line? Lorenzo said. You get to keep operating, Damien said simply. The financial case I've been building with the FBI's Organized Crime Division for the past 14 months gets filed in a drawer. The 3 individuals in your Chicago structure who are currently cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for considerations I arranged, they stopped cooperating. He paused. You get to exist, Lorenzo. That's what you get. The warehouse was completely silent. Lorenzo looked at him for a long time. He looked at the room, the positions, the people, the geometry of a situation that had been arranged around him with considerable advanced preparation. He was doing the math that intelligent men did when the math had only one answer. The woman, Lorenzo said. He was looking at Victoria now. Is not part of this, Damien said. She's been an asset to my organization, Lorenzo said. Information she's provided was managed by her specifically to limit the damage it caused, Damien said. You know that. You've known it for a while. That's why you sent oversight to the pier. He paused. She's also the sister of my children's mother, which makes her covered under the same line. Victoria made a sound that was not quite anything. Not a word, not quite a breath. Claire didn't look at her. Lorenzo was quiet for another long moment. I want the FBI arrangement documented, he said, in a form I can verify. You'll have it in 72 hours, Damien said. And Park, Lorenzo said. Retires quietly, Damien said. No charges, no retaliation. She did what she was placed to do. Lorenzo looked at the floor. He looked back up. He nodded once, not warmly, not with anything that could be called agreement in the fuller sense, but with the specific nod of a man who has evaluated his options and chosen the one that lets him walk out. We're done here, Lorenzo said. His 2 men stepped back from beside him. He stepped down from the platform. He walked toward the east entrance without looking at anyone, and his people fell in behind him, and Damien's people made space, and Lorenzo Moretti walked out of the warehouse in the same composed way he'd been standing in it when Claire arrived, which she supposed was a particular skill. The door closed. The warehouse exhaled. Damien stood in the center of the floor and didn't move for a moment. Then he turned. Claire was already walking toward him, and they met somewhere in the middle of the warehouse floor in the fading red emergency light, and she stopped in front of him, and he looked at her face in the way he'd looked at it through a cafe window in the rain, like something he'd given up expecting to see. The children, she said. Safe, he said. Garrett has them. They've been at the estate the whole time. She pressed her hand flat against his chest. Not an embrace exactly, just contact. The need to verify through touch that the physical fact of him was present and intact. He put his hand over hers and held it there. "It's done," he said. She didn't answer. "Claire," he said. "I know," she said. "I know it is." She became aware of Victoria, standing at the edge of her peripheral vision, not moving, not speaking, in the specific posture of someone who understood they were in a position they had no map for. Claire turned. They looked at each other across 15 feet of cold warehouse floor. Victoria looked in the red shifting light like someone who had been running on a story she'd told herself for a very long time, and had just reached the point where the story ran out of road. She was standing upright, but it was costing her something visible. Claire walked to her. She stopped in front of her and looked at her sister's face, the lines that hadn't been there 5 years ago, the cut of the cheekbones that had always been sharper than Claire's, the eyes that were their mother's eyes, which Claire had not thought about in a long time, and thought about now with a sideways grief that was old and mostly healed and still present underneath everything. "You were 16, Victoria said. Her voice was quiet. "When they died. You were 16 and you needed someone, and I wasn't. I didn't have any architecture for that. I just held it together by not letting anything touch you that I could stop from touching you." She paused. "I never stopped doing that. Even when you were an adult, even when you didn't need it anymore, I just kept—" She stopped. "I know," Claire said. "I'm sorry," Victoria said. "About the twins. About what they didn't have. I told myself it was—" She stopped again. "I told myself a lot of things." "I know," Claire said again. "Are you going to—" Victoria started. "I don't know yet," Claire said. "I can't tell you what this looks like in a year. I can tell you that you're my sister, and that's not something I know how to stop being true, regardless of what you've done." She paused. "But I need you to not be in this for a while. I need you to go somewhere that isn't near us and give us space to—" She stopped and thought about what word came next. "To become whatever this is going to be." Victoria nodded, one small careful movement. "Okay," she said. They stood there for a moment, not embracing, not closing the distance, but not severed either. Something held in suspension that was honest about what it was. Two women who had come from the same place and loved each other in ways that had caused damage, and were going to have to decide slowly what remained usable in the aftermath. Then Claire turned back. Damien was watching her with his hands in his pockets, and his face in that open, unguarded place that only appeared when he'd stopped managing what she was allowed to see. She walked back to him. They walked out of the warehouse together into the afternoon light, which was low and gold and very clean after the red-tinted interior, and the ocean was visible at the edge of the gravel lot, gray and wide and indifferent in the way that large bodies of water were indifferent, which was not cold but simply geological, operating on a different scale. She stopped beside his car and looked at the water. "What happens now?" she said. Not to him specifically, just to the air. "Now we go get our children," he said. She looked at him sideways. He was looking at the ocean. "And after that?" she said. "After that," he said, "we have a very long conversation. Without emergencies, without Moretti people, without wires. Just the two of us in a room." He paused. "A lot of things got skipped over." 5 years of things," she said. "Yes," he said. "I don't want to skip them anymore." She looked at his profile against the afternoon light, the lines in it, the gray that had come in at his temples that hadn't been there before, the set of his jaw that she had read 10,000 times and could read now without needing to translate. He was tired. Not the tactical tiredness of the past 48 hours, but the longer, deeper tiredness of someone who had been carrying something for a very long time and had just set it down and was feeling the absence of the weight. She reached out and took his hand. He looked down at it. He looked at her. He held it. They drove back through Monterey in the late afternoon light, through the streets she had spent 4.5 years making into something that belonged to her, past the harbor where the fishing boats were coming back in, past the street where the Anchor Cafe sat dark and closed in the way it was closed on normal evenings, its sign off, its chairs still up, its worn wooden counter waiting for morning the same way it always had. She looked at it as they drove past. It was still hers. That was the thing she hadn't been certain of until she saw it. Whatever had happened around it, whatever had used it as a backdrop for things she hadn't chosen, The cafe was still hers, still the thing she had built with borrowed money and early mornings, and the specific stubbornness of a person who needed to prove they could make something real from scratch. It would open tomorrow. At the estate, Lucas came down the stairs at full volume the moment he heard the door, his rubber band ball in one hand, and 3 hours of stored commentary on the estate's various features ready for delivery. He stopped 2 steps from the bottom and looked at both of them together in the doorway, his 5-year-old face performing a rapid, unconscious calculation. "Are you guys okay?" he said. "Yes," Claire said. Lucas considered this. "Garrett taught me 3 card tricks," he said. "One of them actually works." He came the rest of the way down the stairs and went past them toward the kitchen, apparently satisfied. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs. She looked at Damien. She looked at Claire. She looked at their hands, which were still connected, neither of them having thought to separate them. She came down the stairs at her own pace and stopped in front of Damien and looked at him for a moment with those careful green eyes. Then she said, "You came back." "Yes," Damien said. "Good," she said, and went to the kitchen after her brother. Damien looked at the empty staircase for a moment. His jaw moved once. He looked at the ceiling. He was doing the thing that he did when something needed to be held somewhere below the surface for a moment before it could be dealt with. That long-practiced internal management that Claire understood now was not coldness, and had never been coldness, but was the only mechanism he had for surviving being a person who felt things as completely as he felt them. She let him have the moment. Then he looked at her, and she looked back, and there was nothing between them now that hadn't been cleared. Not by the warehouse, not by any single event, but by the accumulated weight of the past 2 days laying everything out in the open where it could be examined for what it actually was rather than what fear had made it. 5 years ago, she had seen something in a doorway and run before she understood what she was looking at. She was done running. In the weeks that followed, things changed slowly in the way that real things changed. Not completely, not cleanly, but genuinely. Damien did not dismantle the Blackwood organization. She had not expected him to and had not asked. What he did was restructure it in ways that made the estate on the Cliff Road its safest possible periphery, moved certain operations further from Monterey, pulled certain people out of roles that created exposure, made a series of arrangements with the FBI that were never going to be publicized, but that significantly reduced the number of Lorenzo Morettis who might look in their direction in the future. The deal held. She didn't know all the details of how it held and understood she wasn't going to. That was a line she'd had to locate inside herself. The distinction between needing to know everything and needing to trust the person who did. It was not a comfortable line. It was an honest one. Lorenzo Moretti returned to Chicago. His organization contracted over the following months in ways that appeared, from the outside, to be the ordinary attrition of market forces. 3 federal investigations that had been moving slowly suddenly began moving faster. These things happened without any visible connection to the Cliffside estate in Monterey, where a woman in a pale blue apron made espresso drinks for a coastal town's Tuesday regulars. Victoria left California the week after the warehouse. She sent one message to Claire's phone. 3 words. "I'm working on it." Claire read it and didn't respond immediately, and then, 2 days later, wrote back 2 words. "I know." It wasn't forgiveness in any form that a lawyer could argue. It was a door left not quite closed, which was the most honest thing Claire knew how to offer. Lucas's rubber band ball reached a circumference that he determined was officially larger than Damien's head. Damien submitted to the measurement with a seriousness that Lucas found entirely appropriate. The results were logged with the rubber band ball's documentary precision and reported to Lily, who acknowledged them and returned to her book. Damien learned the bedtime routine in pieces, imperfectly, getting it wrong in specific ways that were different each time. The wrong number of pages, the wrong order of steps, the wrong answer to Lucas's nightly attempt to negotiate an extension. He got better slowly. The slowness was real, and the getting better was real. And Lucas and Lily met it with the particular adaptability of children who had been raised by a capable woman to understand that people were allowed to still be learning things. One evening in late November, Claire came downstairs after the twins were asleep and found Damien at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the legal documents for the Monterey Estate's permanent deed transfer. Out of the shell company he'd used for the initial purchase and into his name, a formality he'd been asked to complete weeks ago and had kept meaning to handle. He was also looking at something else. A piece of paper beside the documents, handwritten, a list. She sat across from him and looked at it. 5 birthdays. Approximate dates. What he'd been able to reconstruct from what Claire had told him, and what the twins had mentioned, and what he'd asked Claire's permission to ask about directly when he understood she was willing to answer. First word, Lily. First word, Lucas. First step, first day of school. The thing she had been there for, and he had not. He was not reading it. He was just sitting with it, in the way you sat with something that couldn't be fixed and needed to be felt completely before it could be moved past. She looked at him sitting with it and felt the specific weight of the 5 years between them, not as a wound anymore exactly, but as a fact. A real thing that had happened, a cost that had been paid and could not be recovered, only acknowledged. She reached across the table and put her hand over the list. He looked at her hand. He looked at her. "It's enough," she said. "What's in front of us? It's enough to work with." He was quiet for a moment. "I keep counting," he said, "what I missed, the math of it." "I know," she said. "Stop counting." "I'm trying," he said. She kept her hand over the list. He put his hand over hers the same way he'd done in the warehouse after the emergency lights came back on. A check, a verification of something present and intact. Only this time it held. This time neither of them moved to take it back. Outside, the November ocean was doing what the November ocean did, dark and permanent and utterly unconcerned with the specific human weight of the moment occurring 60 feet above it. The cliffside estate creaked slightly in the wind in the way old structures creaked, settling into their own bones, becoming more themselves. In the room at the end of the upstairs hallway, Lucas was almost certainly not asleep and was either working on the rubber band ball in the dark or engaged in some architectural project that would present itself in the morning as inevitable and obvious. Lily was asleep, one foot tucked under her knee even in unconsciousness, a book splayed open on the pillow beside her face. The twins did not yet know the full shape of who their father was or what the world he moved through contained. That was a conversation for later, many conversations probably, spread across years, offered in the amounts that their ages and their understanding could hold. Damien had said this to Claire one evening, and she had recognized it as the most careful thing he'd said since arriving in Monterey. And she had said yes, and they had agreed on it the way two people agreed on things when they were trying to do something right instead of something convenient. There was a lot still to navigate. She was clear-eyed about that. A man with Damien's history did not become someone without it by spending a season in a coastal California town learning bedtime routines. The organization existed. The risks it carried existed. The version of their life that would balance what he was with what she'd built here. That version was still being constructed, and it was going to take longer than either of them probably wanted it to take. But the foundation was real. That was the thing she kept coming back to. Not the feeling of it, because feelings were weathered by circumstance, but the structural fact of it. They had both made it through the week that could have ended everything. They had both, in different ways, been required to become something they hadn't been before. And on the other side of that requirement, sitting at a kitchen table in November with the ocean outside and 2 children sleeping upstairs, they were both still here. That was the foundation. You built on foundations. She made a second cup of coffee and sat with him at the table for a long time without talking, and the house settled around them in the dark, and the ocean moved beneath the cliff, the way it had been moving for longer than anyone in the building could imagine. And it was not a perfect thing they were sitting inside of, but it was a true one, and in Claire Whitmore's experience, true was the only thing that ever held.